gentlemen, welcome to season 2 of the Policing in America podcast. I'm going to take a little bit of a different lean this season. We're going to start talking a little bit more about media. We're going to have some conversations with hopefully some activist groups that are coming in that I have lined up. It's going to be a fun ride this season. I look forward to your input. Please hit me up on policinginamerica.com if you want to be a guest on the show. Just hit me up and I'll more than happily have you on and give you a platform. And coming up next is going to be Leslie Marshall. She's a Fox News contributor. She hosts her own nationally syndicated radio show. Leslie and I discuss media and possible media bias and the media's role in policing and shaping the news. I think you're going to enjoy it. It went by really quick. We hope to have her back soon to continue the conversation. Enjoy the podcast. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for tuning into the Policing in America podcast. As we launch season 2, I am very excited and honored to have our first guest of the season, Leslie Marshall. Leslie Marshall hosts a nationally syndicated radio show. It's called The Leslie Marshall Show. She's also a contributor on Fox News. If you keep your finger on the pulse of any national news, you know who this is. So, Leslie, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so I'm going to jump right into it. One of the questions I tend to ask, in my law enforcement background, I train officers all around the country, and I will often ask them, so what are some of the biggest problems facing law enforcement? And always in the top 3 will be media. You will hear things like weak leadership or bad policies or bad narratives, but always in the top 3 will say media bias. So just launching right into it, you're someone that's been in this industry for decades. Do you often see that there may be a media bias? And if not, what do you think shapes that image?
I don't think there's a media bias, but if you were to ask me, what are some of the problems? One of the things you didn't say, which I think connects to and goes along with, correlates with media bias, is image. The police have a bad, image issue. And the reason for that is if the media may seem biased, it's an old cliche, if it bleeds, it leads, but it is a very true. So, for example, if you eat at a restaurant and there's something wrong with your meal, you're going to call the manager. How many of us call the manager when there's something right with our meal or when our meal is fantastic, right? It's the same way where we as, Americans especially, we love to complain and we love to blame and we love to point out those incidents that cause the blaming and complaining. And that's the same with the police department. So, people hear about incidents, for example, here in Los Angeles, where you had a 31-year-old school teacher who died after a tasing incident, the police, at the hands of the police, he's African-American. So when you have, and especially after the death of George Floyd, you have tensions, specifically among certain communities, not just minority communities, but even more specifically African-American communities. So when you see person pulled over, shot in front of their kid when they were reaching and the police thought for a gun and he's reaching for his license and registration. I'm just making this up. These are these are different stories all woven together, if you will, right?
Sure.
Or somebody dies, after tasing, or somebody, gets, shot out and it's the wrong house. I mean, the list goes on. And then when you add to it that the victims in those situations are people of color, and are not living, are living in, maybe a poor section, of a community, that makes a headline. What doesn't, it doesn't sadly make a headline that, an officer, saved a baby and then adopted that baby because that baby was an orphan. We do see that on TikTok or Facebook, but we don't see that on television, hear it on radio, or read it in news, whether online or in print, as a headline. So I think, imaging is part of the problem. People see and hear more of the negatives about police than the positives, where I think most people, and I don't care about your political ideology, I think most people know that most police officers are out there working hard, doing a great job, and that every profession has some bad elements, and that every profession has errors. I mean, my husband's a surgeon, and fortunately, my husband has not been sued, but a lot of doctors have been sued, and sometimes rightfully so, but sometimes they make mistakes. Doctors aren't gods, neither are police officers.
So, okay, so I'm just going off of that, the image. Is it solely the incentive that the idea of if it bleeds, it leads? Is it that incentive that doesn't get the officer doing the good thing or the heroic thing, and that it's only the nefarious or sometimes just a really bad outcome and a really complicated incident that all of a sudden starts getting distilled down to white cop, black suspect, no nuance, no nothing else?
It's not if it bleeds, it leads is the reason for it. But what is the reason for it bleeds, it leads? And that is sales, and that is money. Radio stations, television stations, newspapers, even, online entities, what are they? They're businesses. And what are businesses in the business of doing? Making money. You don't exist unless you make money. You don't get bigger unless you make money. You want more viewers. You want more listeners. You want more subscribers. You want more followers. You want more readers. And how do you get that? You got to one up the other guy. So if the other guy's talking about the hero cop and, this is their income level, and you want to be at a higher income level, and you want your name out there more, well, that's what happens, especially nowadays when you have so many various sources where people can go to get information, and not always accurate information.
Right.
And we know that, I've seen certainly more retractions in the past 5 years than I think in my entire career. But it's not a malicious thing. But everybody out there, I mean, look, we see people with the royal family. We see photographers. They'll push an old lady out of the way to get the shot, right? Why? Because the London Sun is going to pick one shot, and they're going to pay sometimes $1 million for that shot.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
Okay. And I'm not making excuses for it. I'm simply saying It's an extremely competitive business, and it's your one shot. It's your one headline that gets you promoted or the raise, and you've got a family to feed as well. So I work in the media. I don't hear anybody behind closed doors, and I'm a Democrat, and I don't hear anybody behind closed doors, talking negatively about the cops. They will talk negatively about a situation, George Floyd, for example, where I think everybody did. Everyone who saw that video it was shaken to their core. It's very difficult to watch a human being die, right? And to have his last words be mama, right? We all love our mamas, right? But I just, again, people forget, and people might say, oh, well, they should just be giving us the truth. Yes, they should just be reporting the news. Yes, but they do have a choice what news they report, and they are a business.
So thank you for that. It's a very thoughtful answer, and I appreciate it. What I like about you is that I will sometimes listen and I disagree, just like I do with a lot of media personnel, but I always find you to be very well thought. You don't say things that are gaslighting. You don't say things for ratings. I've always appreciated that about you. You and Jessica Tarloff are two that I always find do really well in the hot seats on Fox.
Thank you. It's very nice of you to say.
Of course. You mentioned George Floyd. This is a neat example. Maybe that's the wrong word. Here's an example. Do you know the name Tony Timpa? Does that ring a bell?
The name rings a bell, but I don't know who he is.
Okay, so this was known in law enforcement. It was not known nationwide. Sam Harris, in one of his podcasts, talks about this. Tony Timpa called the police. He was having some kind of a manic episode, maybe a cardiac arrest type situation, and he was high on some type of narcotics, a stimulant. He called police. Police showed up, and he was frantic. They brought him down to the ground, and he was squirming around. They handcuffed him, and they stayed on top of him. Very, very similar to George Floyd. But I mean, knees on the upper trap neck area, knees on the back. And there's 3 or 4 cops, and they're joking and they're laughing. You're like, calm down, buddy. And he is screaming. If you watch the video, it's horrific to watch. And these cops are in no way are trying to hurt him. They're like, relax, buddy. We got an ambulance coming. And he's screaming, Mom. He's screaming for his family members. He eventually dies. He can't get enough air into his lungs, very similar to George Floyd, and he dies. And the ambulance shows up and they say, hey, he's dead. And you could see these cops. It's all on video. It's in Texas. They are shocked. 3 white cops, white suspect. It had about 6,000 views on YouTube. George Floyd happened and it went viral. And we had protests in the streets of Tokyo and Reykjavik.
Well, race is definitely an element. I had a professor in college once that said, and I hope he's wrong, but he said, every great empire falls. the United States is a great empire. We will fall. And he said, my prediction is we will fall because of a race war.
Hmm.
And I hope he's wrong.
Well,
But, look, the loss of life unnecessarily, when a individual could be apprehended or whatever the situation may be, not the outcome is not death. The skin color, to me, and I think to most people, is irrelevant. But I'm a white woman. I don't walk in the shoes of or the skin of a person of color. And I would have been, and I'm sure people would have been horrified if they saw that. And if those officers had been brought to trial, most likely, I think it would have been the same outcome that, the jury found. But I know what you're saying, is it picking and choosing? But race definitely is an element. But police everywhere, if you notice, police, organizations everywhere that I'm aware of have revisited or have changed some of those tactics, because there have been people that died. We know a man in New Jersey that we saw that died. We know, you mentioned this man in Texas. I was not aware of him. And we know George Floyd. I also think, to that point, George Floyd wasn't the first man who died like that. And I think it was the straw that broke the camel's back, or the final nail in the coffin, if you will.
Well, and Leslie, this is what I've tried to preach this in general, and I hate to use the broad term of culture, but Tony Timpa happened in 2020. It happened a few months before George Floyd, and then again in Los Angeles County, another man very similar at a gas station who was having an episode was held down by, I want to say, maybe one of the county sheriff agencies. Also died. They held him down so they could draw the blood, because they were trying to get him with the DUI. So they wanted to get the blood alcohol. They were drawing it. Again, that person died. So this is a police tactic. But it was certainly.
But we can learn from our mistakes, right? I mean, there was a time in this nation that in medical practices, doctors would use leeches, to cure you, and that's
100%.
not something we do today. Why? Because it wasn't effective. It didn't work. So, are there other ways that are more effective and don't have as many casualties? And to your point, picking and choosing, let's use JonBenet, right? JonBenet, you know who she is. I know who she is. We know what she looks like. She was on the cover of People magazine. There are still specials on JonBenet and who killed JonBenet, and how many kids, not pretty and blonde, how many kids, even pretty and blonde. I mean, there are approximately 800 missing children in the United States right now that still haven't been, found, right? And we don't see their pictures on, magazine covers. So there, definitely there are stories, people run with, and then there are stories, that, people don't. Why is it? There are very talented people in this country, right? And there'll be some 13-year-old that sings on YouTube or, TikTok, and he becomes a sensation, and then Justin Bieber signs him or something. And there are 50 more like him or better than him. And they had videos too. So I don't want to say luck, but there is right time, right place. Yeah. Who's putting it out there? How fast it goes out there? Because why do some things go viral and some don't? But certainly the virality of it, feeds into the outrage or the support of that individual. Whether it be an abduction, whether it be a murder at the hands of the police, or whether it be somebody singing.
So, okay. And Leslie, gosh, there's so much. Even those words, a murder at the hands of the police. And those words get thrown in. So Derek Chauvin was found to be a murderer. That was it. He was in a court of law. It was done. The officer in South Carolina that killed Walter Scott, who was running away, murderer. He was brought to justice. He's serving 20 years in prison. Absolutely. But we will say things like police violence. And it almost elicits, I believe language is important in how the media portrays it. And I want to just give you an example, but we'll say, well, another example of police violence. But if somebody's fighting me and I show up to a house and this gentleman just beat his wife, and now I'm taking him into custody, and nobody sees anything around it. They just see me and him and my partner's wrestling. And maybe we're engaging in a violent act, but when we say police violence, it almost makes it sound like violence for no reason. It's just police violence. as opposed to police apprehension or police use of force. It has a connotation.
Well, look, you remember the riots, right? I wasn't living in Los Angeles at the time. I think we, all saw Reginald Denny. We all saw what happened. At the time, Bill Bradley gave a very powerful speech on the floor, on the House floor, in which, he said whack or bam the number of times, which was over 40, that he was struck. The police officers, as you know, were acquitted.
Mm-hmm.
And so they, a jury, found them, not to be guilty. But a person's perception is their reality.
Mm.
And what they see, what they hear, feeds into that. And there is a perception that some cops, especially here in LA, right, are bad guys. And there is a perception, and actually you got to look at numbers too. When you have the numbers in the African American community of the population, and when you look at the numbers in prison, we see this all the time, right? We see a young Black kid steals a bicycle and he is in prison. And we see a young white kid kills somebody in his classroom and he's not.
Mm.
And there are differences not just in skin color, but in money or opportunity. Many of us know the one with the better lawyer wins, right? And sometimes that is the one with the most money who can purchase the better lawyer. Not all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you say, when people say police violence, for me at least, those are the images that come up, the images that they've seen where they feel police used excessive force in those situations. But I think if you ask most people, again, I can only speak for myself, that's not the majority of situations.
Leslie, you said a lot of things, and I want to touch on all of them with numbers and prison. I had a guest on the show. He's a professor emeritus at John Jay College, Barry Latzer. He has a big book. We did a whole podcast on mass incarceration and the term of opprobrium of mass incarceration. Because if you really look at the numbers, it's very different. And Sam Harris did something similar. He looked at the actual data, and it always tells a different story. But let me just go with
wait. If we're going to look at data, when
yes.
when DNA came to fruition and they started to use DNA for when you had like the Innocence Projects and things like that, taking cases, and you can't even take all the cases. If you look just in the state of Illinois, every single person who was exonerated because the DNA showed they were not guilty and who were on death row and who were freed were Black. I'm just giving 100%. One state as an example.
You are 100%. The DNA Project Innocence is an incredible one. There's a professor out of Harvard, a male Black. He's got a great TED Talk on justice. So yes. You're 100% right. There are certainly historical injustices.
Right.
No
and
doubt.
Another thing, I'm going to tell. Okay, this you're gonna love this. Okay. I'm sorry. Can I say? And you don't have a sponsor that's a steakhouse, right?
I don't. I have no sponsors.
Because I'm going to out this because this just happened this past weekend. Okay. I'm white. My husband is brown. He's Indian. My daughter is white. And my son is brown, but he's very dark brown. I will often have people ask me if my husband's African American, although African Americans will be like, it's clear he's Indian or Pakistani, right? My son was born in Pakistan. He's adopted. So he's darker than my husband and the rest of us. And if he sees this, he's going to kill me for saying this. But there were two incidents that happened, okay? We were at and now I'm going to sound like, people are going to, she sounds like an elitist, rich girl. No, I grew up pretty poor and worked hard for what I have. We were at the Ritz-Carlton in Laguna Beach. I had a niece and nephew coming, and I have a lot of points with a certain organization because I travel a lot. So I used my points to treat my niece, nephew, and my kids to a weekend at the beach, Laguna Beach at the Ritz-Carlton. Beautiful property, overlooks it. And they're going to kill me for this, right? But we're walking down the hall, and I dropped something, and I went to pick it up, and my son is way ahead of us because he had the room key, and he had to use the restroom. So he's racing to the room, okay? We're all back, okay? My white nephew, white niece, white daughter who was half Indian but looks lighter than me. And security came around the corner, and they were very quickly walking behind my son. he starts to go in the room. They're getting close to him. And then he goes, Mom, like, and he goes, it's not working. Do I hold it this way or that? They turned, they saw me, and they diverted. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I know
Mm-hmm.
that I know he was being racially profiled. We were just at a steakhouse this weekend in Anaheim. I won't mention names. I shouldn't have mentioned it. Sorry. But,
That's okay.
but hey, you gotta, yeah. And, we walked in, it was pouring rain, and my son's a volleyball player. There was a huge volleyball tournament. So the restaurant is filled with volleyball players or dancers, because there was a dance thing there too. Okay.
Sure.
It's pouring rain. Okay. And we go in, and they said to my son, "Oh, you have Crocs. You have to sit in the bar." Really? Well, I pointed out, well, how come that table, the three of them have flip-flops? Because I can see it. And how come that table, they have hoodies? And how come that? Because they did have a sign that said you have to have like business casual attire. But if you saw the room, they clearly were making exceptions, because nobody was at Disneyland in Anaheim in that weather eating at that steakhouse except the people at the hotel across the street for the tournament. Right.
Right.
And
right.
What do you think the difference was between my son and all those people I just pointed out?
So I'm going to guess his look.
They were white.
Yeah.
Everyone in the room was white or Asian. And because I did, a composite, and, and when I brought that up, we got a table.
Sure.
So my point being, there is a reality to the way, somebody looks. I mean, I live in a community, and we have an HOA, and somebody was texting one time, "Did you see that man? He's sitting in a Mercedes. He's African-American." And people were going crazy. And we have a Black family in this community. And I'm like, what is going on? So I just walked over to him and I said, "I got to be honest with you, sir. People are going crazy. You're sitting in this car,
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, that's so funny." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Well, this is my boss's house, and he asked me to meet him here, but I'm early."
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And then the neighbor drives up the street, and he's like, "Yeah, he's like my VP." No, and he's sitting in a Mercedes with a suit on. He's not.
Right.
I don't care about the hoodie, so he's not walking up the street with a gun. I mean, but there are those realities that, and there are stats out there that show that especially African American males are disproportionately stopped, by police, questioned by police, frisked by police, or whatever, and we know wrongly incarcerated, in our system. So for that community to be sensitive, overly sensitive, I think is appropriate.
And all your points well taken, and I am a big supporter of this. And I make so when you talk about the Project Innocence and such, I make that point very evident when I train with officers. There's a reason why the overwhelming majority of cases that are overturned due to DNA evidence lean heavily towards people of color, and one specific color, Black. Absolutely, because there was a time when that's all it took was just an eyewitness statement. Especially if it was a female white, that person was going to be incarcerated. And so there's no doubt that is an issue, and it has been an issue. I do also think it's fair to say it's becoming less and less prevalent when it comes to use of force, when it comes to shooting people, when it comes to incarceration. And here's just a little bit on that. In America, 322 million people, about 41 million are considered Black or African American. Not every person that's Black wants to be called African American, so I say both. And about 560,000 are in prison, right? And if you look at the larger numbers, you have 41 million people, and about 500,000 are in prison. And then the number is similar with whites. It's about 540,000, Hispanics, 400,000. So you look at the overall population, and some in media critique would say we're pushing a story or a narrative that is not necessarily as widespread or as dangerous as it seems. When you have people in politics, left or right, that say we need to stopping men solely because of the color of their skin, no other reason, and we have cops all wearing body-worn cameras that record 2 minutes. It's always recording. It's always to think that I'm going to look at you and say, "Hey, Leslie, there's a black guy. Let's hem him up. Let's get him up. Like it's insane to think somebody would want to do that. First off,
I
in
don't
today's
think
day and
that's
age.
I don't look. I'm not a police officer, but I can tell you what I've seen living here in Los
Sure.
Angeles. I also saw it in New York. Um, I've seen a couple of things. First of all, if you are Mexican and you're driving a broken down truck and
Hmm.
you have gardening equipment in the back, I have seen people pulled over, and I know they're being pulled over because people are checking if they're illegal. And I know it's because they're Mexican with gardening equipment and they've broken down a truck, which is it's a stereotype.
Hmm.
But I mean, and I know that because I'm next to them at the street and they weren't speeding, and
Hmm.
they don't have any lights out because it's daytime, they're not on, and they do
Hmm.
have a tag on their license plate. Because I just, doing what I do. I'm not, reporting on. It's not my job to report. I opine, and I'm a Democratic
Hmm.
strategist, a political analyst. But with a journalist background that I have, I'm a curious person. So
Sure.
I've seen that, and I I can tell you that I have seen in places where there are very few or no minorities, whether it be a school, whether it be a school function. Um, I have seen security alerted or police called when the black guy shows up, not knowing that the black guy is Tommy's stepfather, or
Hmm.
actually Tommy's real father. He just looks like his mother. You know what I mean? That kind of thing.
Hmm.
I've
Hmm.
seen it, and not just once or twice. And I've seen it. So I and I know that African American moms and dads often have what they call the talk with their black sons. I don't know that. I don't know that world, but I do know what people tell me and my friends tell me, who are part of that community.
So, Les, let me just pull on this a little bit, and I'm excited to actually banter with you. I've always wanted to do it. So, this idea of knowing, I know why they stopped them because they did have their tags, they didn't have their lights. But were you being so observant that you actually saw whether they looked at a cell phone or not? Or that they had a seatbelt on, or that they took a drink of something, or that their ladder wasn't properly secured, because we get a lot of these tools that fly out of these pickup trucks that cause hellacious accidents. Like, all I ask is it possible
It's
that
possible.
you
Is
did?
it possible I'm sitting next to them looking at my phone and the police didn't pull me over?
Yes, 100%.
Right?
Because I can only see so many people at once.
Right. Right.
Right. So I just ask, can we leave
Right.
open the space that it
Like,
wasn't
like
necessarily
that's what I'm
nefarious?
saying. I'm not saying they're going, hey, there's a Mexican, let's stop him. But I
Sure.
do think that there is a stereotype that we all are aware of for certain people with, certain communities. And I mean, why did George Zimmerman think Trayvon Martin was a problem? He was a black kid wearing a hoodie. I mean, that's how it started. Um, Trayvon Martin didn't assault him, or wasn't breaking into his house, or that kind of thing. So, but I mean, I think this is why people will say in the black community, and white people will go, I don't understand. What conversation do we need to have? This is the conversation we need to have, but we're
Well,
two white people having it. You know what I'm saying?
I,
But this is the conversation we need to have, because I just think, look, when people go, I'm not prejudiced. We're all prejudiced. We all have prejudices. We all have bias. It may not be black and white, right? You know,
mhm.
I have to be honest. I mean, I have relatives who died in the Holocaust. And the first time I heard somebody with a German accent in an elevator, I wanted to get out of there. I was frightened. Now, that's
Wow.
absolutely, I was a child. Now, as an
Mhm.
adult, I know that's absolutely, ridiculous that somebody with a German accent is going to, put me in a camp because I'm half Jewish.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But
Sure.
I mean, we're taught things, or we experience things, or we see things. So, when you bring it back to the media, it's not the media's responsibility to shape how we think and what we do or how we react. It's just the
Okay.
media's job to put out there what's going on.
Well, okay. So, gosh, all right. Let me just go with my thought. Not your job. It's not your job to shape. So let me go back to that.
No, it's
So
not.
I appreciate that you at least leave open the fact that maybe look, the LAPD is 60% Hispanic.
Right.
Like, if you're shot by someone in the LAPD, if you're pulled over by somebody in the LAPD, there's a 25% chance it's a white guy. So
Right.
the idea of like prejudice and racism, it's very hard to pull off in some of these bigger agencies that are incredibly diverse
Right.
in that regard. And there's other reasons that maybe the general public might not know. You talked about the talk. I know that people have talk. I find this funny because when people will say, well, you don't know what it's like to walk around with the skin of this particular person. Well, nobody knows what it's like to walk around with my skin. But they think they do. They think I grew up in the suburbs. They think I'm just, a privileged male white. They didn't realize grew up in the south side of Chicago. Mom had me at 17. Government cheese, food stamps. Don't know my dad. He was killed young. Like
right. They don't know your background, but the difference is your background is hidden within. Your skin color is outside. And as a white man, look, I'll be honest. Let's at least be honest. White people have privilege. White men have more opportunities than men of color. Period.
Do I get to respond?
Absolutely, Trisha.
Because, so let me finish my thought, and then I'm gonna go back and tell you. The talk was also given to me in the south side of Chicago. My grandmother, when I first got my driver's license, took a paper clip and she folded up a $10 bill and she slid it behind the driver's license and said, whenever an officer pulls you over, you don't say why, you don't say anything, you hand them the driver's license. And I don't care what they say you did, you tell them you're sorry, and they're going to hand you back that driver's license, and that $10 bill will be gone. Like, I'm a white kid. Why didn't anybody say, don't worry about it? You're a white kid. They're not going to mess with you.
But what did you also get taught by? I like her already. What did you also get taught by her? That police are corrupt.
Oh, 100%. Yes.
And not all police are corrupt. And not every cop would take that $10 bill, I would hope. But her teaching you that's in your mind as a kid.
100%. And look, Leslie, I have a number of stories. I could tell you about the poor, terrible policing I experienced as a young, white, poor kid in Southside Chicago. So sometimes it's often portrayed that one community is marginalized or one community is systemically oppressed, and poor white communities can get some pretty bad policing as well.
Absolutely.
I'm not trying to say, right, I'm not trying to say my oppression's worse than yours. I don't want to have an oppression Olympics, but I also want to say, look, there are some realities here in policing that go beyond race. And this is the genesis of why I want to have this talk. Because if all we talk about is race, then we do interventions, bias training, procedural justice training, bias policing complaints that only touch the problem. We've had so many interventions since George Floyd. And you know what's gone up? Shootings, police use of force, police complaints of bias. And you have officers pulling back now. You have officers saying, I have, this is on record as when I say record, like personally, officers say we will see a person of a certain color pull up next to us below the red light. And they'll say, you know what? It's not even worth it. It's not, because if this turns into something, I only stopped them because they were this. I only did it. Forget it. I'm not even going to bother because I can't win for losing. Go ahead, Leslie, please.
But to your point, okay, I'm glad you said that, okay? But you can't look, there are people that think that way, all right? There are surgeons who aren't going to operate on a high-risk patient because they're afraid they're going to get sued. But somebody has to operate on that person. Thankfully, my husband's one of those people. My husband won't live like that. He can't live like that. He believes in the oath that he took to do no harm. He is grateful for the opportunity he had with education, and he loves what he does. And if he can help somebody, then he's going to. But no, there are people out there that perhaps have even died because there's you take them within a practice. And I'm not talking about orthopedics. I mean, the death rate's extremely low with orthopedics unless your bone issue is cancer, leukemia or, some other kind of bone cancer. But, if you're talking about, cardiovascular, right. Or brain, there, so there's always going to, be that. And I think there's going to, be that in any profession. But when you're talking about, police, I think even before George Floyd, there are people that are like, it's not worth it. There was a police officer. We were at, Home Goods. Do you have Home Goods where you live? I don't know where you live, Tom.
I know in general the chain.
Yeah. Well, and I see now. To me, I would be like, well, more women would know that. This is what I'm thinking, and then I can see guys going, "I shot there." What are you talking about, Liz? That's sexy. But I was in there one time, and I was looking for something, some kitchen thing, And a guy walked in, and the reason I noticed him is he was half naked. I
Okay.
mean, really half naked in a store. And I'm like, and he walked over. Now, they don't sell food, but they do have a few food items like, those fancy gourmet breadsticks that are being sold in that fancy container to put on your counter for, to look pretty, right?
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
he just pulled those out of the fancy container, opened them, started eating, walked out by the armed security guard who
Oh
just
yeah,
let him, right?
absolutely,
And when I
absolutely.
asked, do you know what the security, I said, hey, I'm just curious. I said, I could care less. I would have bought him the breadsticks
Sure.
just so we put some clothes on. And I
Yeah.
said, what, why did you, let him go? And he said he needs the breadsticks more than all of you.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, it was just like a judgment call. I was in Best Buy. My daughter had once again lost her AirPods. Any of us who have
Ugh,
teenagers and they need them for school. And it's like, they're like $100, people. Could you please stop
right.
forcing them to bring them to school? So
Right.
we were in there to get them. It was one of her Christmas presents. And, we went in to buy them. And there was a long line. And the guy who helped us said, I can ring you up over here. And I said, okay. And the case that it came in, had this and that, and I don't know. Then this other thing. Then an alarm went off and a phone. So I don't know why he told us the story, but he did. He said one day, because I said, "Oh, security's really beefed up, because it's Christmas time,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Yeah, but we don't use it that much." And that's why I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, one day I walk out over a man, and he's looking at the computer. Can I help you, sir?" And he takes the display computer and puts
Oof.
it in his bag. And he goes,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, sir. And he goes, you're going to have to pay for that. And the guy's like, no,
Yeah.
I'm not. And he goes, no, I'm sorry, sir. And he goes, you're going to have to bring it, to the register and pay for that. And I said, please don't tell me you're going to say some liberal policy that you don't arrest that. And he goes, no, not at all. He goes, he smiled, he opened his coat and he goes, he's got a gun, a real gun. And he goes, and I
Mm,
have gun. I know gun. And he goes, yeah, he had a gun. And he said the kind, I don't know anything about guns.
sure.
So he said, I called the armed security guards and he said, there's going to be a man with a blue jacket and a red bag walking out the front door. He has a computer with him. Let him go. And
Mm.
he said the reason he let him go is the damage that could be done with one bullet,
Mm-hmm.
not just to him, because he's a manager. And he goes, I'm responsible for the store, my staff, the patrons, and the security. He goes, that security guard shoots him, stops him and he takes the gun out and shoots him and he goes over the computer. He goes, it's not worth it. He goes, well, Best Buy's got a lot of money. They'll write it off as a loss. That's what he said,
Yeah.
honestly. So I
Well,
think, so I know these things have existed, before George Floyd, where you just weigh the consequences.
so yes, they have, but we now have demonstrable data quantifying the reduction in traffic stops, in pretextual stops, in pedestrian stops. We can now see. So while it may have existed, good luck trying to tell a Chicago cop, a New York cop, or an LAPD cop to be lazy. Like, it's a sense of pride if you know these cohorts of people. Portland, another very storied agency with a terrible history. But these cops want to do well. They were out there for over 100 days. I spoke to a lot of these cops, and they suited up every day to get abused. And a lot of these cops, the quote big city cops, they take an incredible amount of pride. It's their identity. They don't like people walking all over them or committing crime in front of them. And
Well, of course
Leslie,
not. I mean, their job is to enforce the law, to protect and to serve, right? And to
yeah,
enforce the law. But welcome to my world, okay? I mean, it's different. I'm not getting shot at, but I mean, let's just use it as an example. Sorry to bring politics. I'm just going to use it, as an example, right?
yeah,
So you'll have people go, inflation's so high, the Democrats are destroying this country. We are
yeah.
my brother-in-law calls me demonically possessed. No joke,
Oh,
because I don't agree with his politics. I'm like,
okay.
when did this all happen? But
Yeah.
now inflation has been dropping, right, consistently for the past few days. And rather than everybody, Democrat or Republican, no matter who's president, no matter who's in charge in the House and the Senate, going, Yay! This is a
Sure.
good thing. Here's the
Sure.
headline. Yippee! This is a good thing. No, it's not. It continues to go on and on and on. So to the point being, there are people who are going to hate the cops no matter what. There are going to be people that love the cops no matter what, and there are going to be people that base their conclusion on the evidence presented to them and their perception. It's the same with everything. There are going to be people that love Donald Trump or hate Donald Trump no matter what, Joe Biden, whatever. It's the same thing. And I know that policing is not politicking. Politicking has gotten to be quite dangerous for many. I mean, we just saw, some Democrats, who could have lost their lives at the hand of a Republican gone rogue who lost an election, right? In New Mexico. And, so I'm glad that they have pride. To me, whatever a person does, you should, take, pride in your work.
Sure.
But again, I don't think the majority of Americans, and I know I can't speak for the majority of Americans, but I know me, and I'm just another American. The majority of Americans, and, even within these communities, know that the police are out there. And you know why, especially where cops walk a beat, because that community knows those police officers and knows that those police officers are looking out for them. But sometimes looking out for them means arresting their neighbor.
Leslie, it does. And let me just tell you, as a bucket list, I one day want to have a podcast with you on politics because it would be just amazing. As a news junkie, I'm just going to tell you, it'd be like
I don't have any more room in my calendar.
I know, right? But one of these days, I'm going to figure whether I'm going to be on the outnumbered or one of them. I'm going to figure out a way. Okay, so we did so much. You did say, and I want to bring back to this idea of we're not supposed to shape it. We're supposed to deliver it. I honestly, Leslie, and just there's so many names we can bring up, whether it's Hannity, Tucker, Jake Tapper, Wolf Blitzer, all, Anderson. They're smart, good people. They're businessmen, but so many of them shape it in their way. And can I give you just one example? And I try to have this conversation with somebody who's on a different political ideology. And the CNN news story came out, LAPD kills innocent bystander at Trader Joe's. Fox News came out and said, innocent bystander caught between gunfire between suspect and LAPD tragically dies. And I said, look at the headlines. And both are correct. An officer shot a civilian. Not intentionally, of course not. There was an exchange of gunfire and a civilian tragically got hit. It was the Trader Joe's incident. That was very well televised. And if not, it's easy to see if you look it up. And two news stories, two big, powerful news outlets. And I felt like one was being a little bit more reasonable and fair. And then the other one said, oh, this is a good way to say, once again, a police department killing people. And I tried to show that as an example, and everybody went back to their silos. But it should just be reported, just like you said. And I feel like let me
interrupt because this is this is definitely something I know.
Okay.
I was on Sean's show last night. I've known Sean when my name was bigger than Sean. That's how long I've known Sean. And Sean is not, and he will tell you, he's not a reporter. He's not an anchor, and he's not a journalist. Sean and I do the same thing, only he's a Republican and I'm a Democrat. He's a conservative. I'm a liberal. He was a radio talk show host who Roger Ailes brilliantly put on television with my friend, the now late Alan Combs. When people didn't know Fox News Channel because it was so far down your dial, most people didn't have that on cable. Okay.
Yeah.
And kind of like a Crossfire, which CNN used to have, that Tucker was one of the players, in that, as well. Tucker as well, Laura as well. No, don't get me wrong. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, all of the networks, there are reporters and there are opiners. Because people will say to me sometimes on Twitter, you are not reporting the fact. No, I'm not. I'm giving my opinion. Okay. So, maybe I won't use Sean, but, I was on there last night. But all of these people who are not reporting the facts are giving their opinion. Yeah. An opinion is neither right or wrong. An opinion is biased. An opinion is, being told. So if it's a CNN opinion program and that's the way they're putting it out, that's what we have to teach people. because that's what they have to teach people. There are some in the audience of all of these shows on all of these networks that love the host so much that they will blindly follow them. If the host said 2 + 2 is 5, they would be like, I knew it. I knew there was something wrong with 2 + 2 is 4, or they will believe it. They will argue with their family at Thanksgiving. Relationships will end over it.
Yeah.
It's not. 2 + 2 is 4. But with an opinion, you can argue. Look, and I'll use her name. I'm not a fan. Marjorie Taylor Greene implied numerous times that the Parkland shooting was a false flag.
Right.
Horrific for the people who buried their children who
100%.
have PTSD for life from that incident.
Yep.
And even more horrific that she's paid with our tax dollars and she was elected by American voters. There are people who believe what she said and may join that. Now, you are a former police officer, former sergeant, or you're still a sergeant, Tom? Are you still a sergeant?
I am, but it's unrelated. I can't, I have no, you know what I'm saying? Like I am.
Yes, no, I know.
I'm currently active.
Law enforcement, right?
Yes.
Now, I don't care about, I would imagine, and I'm not a police officer, but I would imagine that politics went out the window when you guys saw your own guys in blue, the Capitol Police, being stabbed with the base of a flagpole with our American flag flying in the wind at the top of it as it happened. And
absolutely.
And people saying that never happened.
Right.
There are people out there saying that never happened.
Sure.
There are people out there saying, police officers who committed suicide as a result of this, right? So,
yes.
Again, can a person's opinion be dangerous? Yes, absolutely. I feel I am responsible for everything I say and do. I am honest, and I, like the police officers, take pride. I take pride in my work. I'm very honest. And I realize that everything I say and do has a ramification or a consequence because I have a platform. Not everyone feels that way. Right. Sadly. And so when you say, the police, have pride, but yes, can it be dangerous? Yes. But a news outlet, and, there are some that just have news. I mean, more of these national networks, cable networks, have both opinion-based programming and, fact reporting.
And punditry, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. But then there are some that don't. Like our local news here in Los Angeles, it's just anchors reading, the Chiron and going to reporters. You don't see opinions. You just see interviews of men on the street. It's very different.
So Leslie, this is a good example. And without going down the rabbit hole of January 6th per se, this is what I hear among officers. And it seems to be a common thread no matter what part of the country. January 6th, terrible, lots of coverage, use the word insurrection, but the 2020 riots were covered as mostly peaceful. You've seen the clip of the CNN guy going, it seems to be mostly peaceful, right? And the buildings burning behind him. Right. And the caveats of, well, you're going to get this. And somebody throws a bottle, didn't hit the reporter, but it threw the bottle, and mostly peaceful. And I have said this, if we look up the term insurrection, people broke in and they tried to halt a government process. If you break into a police station and take it over, by definition, that's an insurrection. That is an uprising of the people against the most visible form of government, your police station. And now you've taken over that police station to stop operations. And then there were people cementing police station doors and trying to set them on fire. Like, I don't know how much that got reported, but it just seemed like the coverage was not exactly fair. And a lot of cops hate January 6th.
It depends where you're watching, though.
It does depend where you're watching. Right. You're right. This is why I tend to watch.
That's what I said. It depends where, it depends where you're watching. One, regarding the wording, you admitted yourself like you're a political junkie and you're in law enforcement. So you're coming from a different perspective than Mary, who works inside
Hmm.
the home and doesn't know who Kamala Harris is. Do you know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yes,
Because
ma'am.
yeah,
Yeah.
because believe me, because I live in a bubble. I live in a political bubble, and when I'm in DC and New York, those are other bubbles. In LA, there's a bubble, and I just was in New York doing Outnumbered last week, and in DC for special report. And when the day after or that night that I was out, I had a little reunion with my college girlfriends that we lived in the dorm together.
Hmm.
We all just had like, a milestone birthday, and we did college reunions. So they knew I was in New York. We all live in different states. So everybody met in New York because one lives there and I was going to be there. And we were there, and I was talking to them about something that was a big deal that day. And I can't even remember because they were like, how was work? Good. And one of them was like, oh, what are you talking about? And I was talking about whatever we were talking about, which I've since forgotten. And it was just last week because I
Right.
talk about different issues, every day.
Yeah.
And there were five of us, six of us, you see, five of them went, and a couple of them had no idea what we were talking about because they just don't, like one person, oh, I don't watch the news, it's too negative, too
Right.
negative.
Right.
It depresses me, right? So
Yeah.
to your point about insurrection, um, what you call it to me is not the issue.
Hmm.
What happened? How do we prevent it from happening again? Whether it's what happened in Portland at the police station, whether it's what happened at our Capitol on January 6th, we have a problem. What is the solution? I
Hmm.
don't think it helps us, like you had mentioned, all of the diversity training and whatnot after the George Floyd incident that didn't make statistically the dent in the problem that they were hoping it would, right?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think whether we call it an insurrection or not, Portland or DC puts a dent in the problem. It's not, I don't think what we call it, I don't think that's a part of the solution, either. Because we really get hung up on semantics.
We do. 100%. And Leslie, I submit to you, maybe we're not addressing the problem. And that's what I keep trying to say is if we just keep putting out there these narratives. There was a little blurb in the Week magazine. Are you familiar with that publication? The Week. It kind of gives
Yes.
snippets of a bunch of stories. Okay. And I have a picture of it. One story said white officer kills black suspect, boom, boom, boom. The next story underneath said Somalian born officer shoots Australian tourist. It was a black cop who shot a white girl, but they called it Somalian born and Australian tourist. The other one, white cop, black suspect. And I just thought it couldn't be more clear your motives here. Like and I'm sure just like you see bad instances of policing, it's fair to say there are bad instances of media bias, for lack of a better
Well,
word.
to your point, my husband's Muslim, and I have to say that only religion they ever mention, I never hear it was a Jewish guy. I mean,
Sure.
look, I mean, the black community said, and the Muslim community said, if they were scaling the walls of the Capitol, helicopters would have shot them down. And
Hmm.
I believe that. I
Hmm.
believe that. And people would have been tweeting. I heard him say, I heard him say,
Sure.
Allahu Akbar, right?
Hmm.
And it would be a lie, and it would go, and then you would find out, oh, the guy wasn't even Muslim, and he was trying to get away. Those people were attacking him. You know what I'm saying? Now that
Yeah.
isn't always the case, but I'm just saying that, I understand, your point completely. But if you notice, they do that. I mean, every time
Oh,
it's a
yeah, yeah.
terrorist attack, people are looking for the religion or looking at the name. They're looking at the name because if the name is Arabic, they assume the religion, and therefore they assume it's terrorism since 9/11.
I agree. And if it's a cop, they're looking at the color of the cop's skin. Like that seems to be it. If it's an attack, what religion are they following? And I think that's
Well, that's another
because
thing.
there's
There are white cops that kill white people and black cops that kill black people. And
yeah,
again, that's not the sexier headline. That doesn't
right.
sell as many papers.
Well, look, Leslie, it has been. I already know. Like I'm going to go down and I will monopolize your time. But I'm coming up on the hour. I have to be aware of it. So I want to let you go so that you'll come back one day and I stay in your good graces. If you had a message, maybe to those in law enforcement who listen, who just feel like they're not getting a fair shake? You're a prominent personality. You've already stated support for police. What would you say to some of these people who are really struggling, who want to do the right job, but feel like they're always being labeled as a negative in the media?
I know we're up on the hour. I'll try to be very brief. When I lived in Chicago, I went to Moody Baptist Church, or Moody Bible Church.
Yeah, I know it well. I'm from Chicago.
When I was a practicing Christian, I am not now, but when I was. And there was a visiting pastor, and I don't remember his name, but I do remember his sermon. And he said he was a black man that grew up on the south side of Chicago, and he was taught that white people were the enemy. And he went to work. He worked in a factory, and he wanted nothing to do, with white men. And he was broke. And he was in the cafeteria one day, and a white man offered him half his sandwich. And he didn't want to take it because it's a white man. But eventually, he was hungry enough that one day he finally took it, and they talked, and they became friends. He got hurt in the factory one day, and everybody else kept doing their job because they don't want to punch out or lose hours or time. And the only person who stopped to help him was the white man with the sandwich. And he said, that man changed my attitude towards white people. He goes, you didn't know it, but he was a spokesperson. He said he was a spokesperson for y'all crackers. That's what he said. Right. And I laughed, and the church is very diverse, but and it changed him. I know people that have hated gay people till they met one. And my whole point in saying that is, my message would be, go to the communities that have a perception of you, have that conversation, because they can truly answer those questions, and you will walk away feeling differently about them, and they will walk away feeling differently about you. And I don't have stats on this except for life experience, but my life experience and the people that I know, the stats are more favorability and positives come out of that than not.
Ladies and gentlemen, wise words from Leslie Marshall. Leslie, thank you so much for coming on. I can't tell you how honored I am. If you can think of anyone, or if you have Jessica maybe would connect us, I'd love to have other people maybe in your orbit come on and continue this talk. I want to do a whole season on media. Oh,
cool. Yeah. Well, I will let people know. I certainly enjoyed it, Tom, and you're good at what you do.
Oh, thank you so much. Hey, I'll be in touch with you. I know you're super busy, but I might just throw you stuff downrange. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I can tell you from Chicago with your so's.
Oh, exactly. Thank you so much. It was an honor. It was my honor.
Oh, God, no. Honor's all mine. Thank you.
Thanks.